In the heart of the Sahara Desert lies a vast region whose land sits below sea level, and Egypt is seriously considering flooding it with water. This area is known as the Sahara Depression. It covers about 19,605 square kilometers wide. Uninhabited desert expanse dotted with salt lakes and marshes. It is a harsh, hot, and arid place. But this reality may soon change, because Egypt is planning to transform this barren desert into a sea. If the depression is filled with water to the appropriate level, it would turn into a massive body of water spanning nearly 20,000 square kilometers, a size slightly smaller than Canada's famous Lake Winnipeg. If this project succeeds and this lake becomes real, Egypt could find solutions to an entire set of problems that affect not only the country itself, but the whole African continent. It seems we are witnessing the beginning of a truly pioneering and revolutionary project in every sense. This is what we'll explore in today's video. All right, before we dive into the rest of this, if you're new here, consider subscribing. And if you like what you're seeing, hit that like button. It seriously helps the channel a ton. Since the British first mapped the Sahara Depression after World War I, engineers have been unable to forget the idea of connecting this depression to the Mediterranean. See, some proposed digging a massive canal, others considered building a tunnel, and one idea even suggested combining both a canal and a tunnel. In fact, the concept of using the Sahara Depression to generate electricity dates back to 1912, and the idea was studied in greater depth in 1927 by the English geologist John Ball. In addition to mapping the area, John Ball was the first to propose exploiting the significant difference in elevation between sea level and the depression floor to transform it into a major source of hydroelectric power, essentially, turning this vast sandy basin into a giant power plant. Even the colonizers, despite being heavily driven by their own interests and profits, did not view this desert simply as worthless land. They considered how they could fully exploit it to gain maximum benefit and revenue. After all this planning and consideration, matters took an unexpected turn in 1957 when the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, presented a document to President Dwight Eisenhower proposing the flooding of the Sahara Depression. According to their calculations, letting seawater flow into the depression would create massive lakes and achieve four main benefits. First, it would give the impression of being a grand and peaceful project. Second, it would lead to changes in the local climate. Third, it would create job opportunities for many years. And finally, once completed, the new region could potentially be inhabited. Starting in 1964, engineer Friedrich Bassler took charge of the project. Bassler headed an international advisory board tasked with determining how to carry out the project and securing the necessary funding. For nearly 10 years, he was the principal advocate for the Sahara Depression idea. But the main obstacles were always money, and complexity. Bringing seawater deep into the desert proved to be extremely costly. Digging a massive canal or tunnel became out of the question due to the extremely high costs. In addition, vast areas would need to be cleared of landmines, as northern Egypt is still filled with millions of unexploded shells left behind by soldiers during World War II. Despite all this, the plans remained ambitious. One of Friedrich's ideas was to use peaceful nuclear explosions not for war. The concept was both simple and shocking.
Drill 213 wells along the proposed canal route and detonate a 1.5 megaton nuclear device in each one. This explosive power is roughly 100 times the strength of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Although the idea aligned with Eisenhower's 1953 program, Atoms for Peace,
the problems did not disappear. To carry out such a massive number of nuclear detonations, an enormous number of residents, estimated at a minimum of 25,000 people, would have had to be evacuated. Even more dangerous was the possibility that shock waves from the explosions could disturb the East African Rift, a geologically unstable region only about 450 kilometers from the proposed detonation sites. In simple terms, there was a real risk of triggering an earthquake. Another obvious downside was the potential alteration of ocean currents and destruction of coastal shorelines. Waves and currents would begin eroding coastlines that had always been calm, and this erosion could even reach distant shores. And of course, there was the issue of radioactive contamination. People naturally wondered, would the new lake become radioactive after all these nuclear blasts? The responses given were vague and almost humorous and certainly not convincing. Given all these severe risks, the Egyptian government rejected the plan, and the project's strongest supporters were forced to abandon it. Still, everyone acknowledged that nuclear explosions would have drastically reduced the costs, since digging by conventional means was extremely expensive. But the price of this cost reduction was far too high in terms of safety and environmental impact. Years passed, and the idea received a new opportunity. From time to time, scientists and engineers returned to discuss the notion of flooding the Qattara Depression. This idea had always appeared to be the perfect solution from economic, climatic, and even social perspectives. Yet, no matter how many times the project was discussed, it never advanced beyond the stage of talk. Interest in the project has not disappeared to this day. The Egyptian authorities have attempted multiple times to revive the idea, but each attempt collapsed under the strict logic of numbers. The conclusion was always the same: too expensive, too risky, too complex. Every cost-benefit analysis said the same thing: it is not worth it. Finally, on April 11, 2023, Egypt signed a contract with a consulting firm called Agate Consulting to conduct a new study. Its purpose is to assess whether this project can finally see the light of day with a fresh, updated perspective. The world has changed, engineering technology has evolved, and perhaps it is time to recalculate the costs and risks. The idea is to carve a passage through the desert to connect it to the sea. According to the plan, a massive canal or tunnel must be excavated, spanning between 55 and 96 kilometers. Depending on the chosen route from the Mediterranean Sea, after that, seawater would flow directly into the Qattara Depression. But the issue is not just the length. To the north, the depression meets a plateau rocky barrier separating the desert from the sea. This plateau may not seem very high, rising only about 200 meters above sea level. But that height is enough to make construction extremely difficult. Cutting a passage at sea level through this hard rock is a colossal engineering challenge, the kind of project that can etch a chief engineer's name into history for decades. One could say it is a once-in-a-lifetime undertaking, not just a component within a larger plan. And beyond all this lies the desert itself, a difficult and unpredictable construction environment. The ground there can crumble or collapse suddenly. Loose sand and sticky mud can create major problems, clogging pumps and causing excavation walls to cave in. These issues could turn the construction process into a constant battle against the very nature of the terrain. However, despite all this, there are possible solutions, because digging a massive sea-level canal through the plateau is not the only option. Modern tunnel boring machines can be used to dig one or several tunnels. Excavating beneath the plateau is certainly not a cheap solution, but it is technically feasible. There is another option as well: laying an extremely long pipeline that connects to the Nile River in the northeast, though it would need to be at least 300 kilometers long. At this point, we must focus on the drilling machines themselves. We need to understand the equipment planned for digging through the desert. Mega projects like this have relied on special tunnel boring machines, gigantic structures that literally chew through the earth. At the front of these machines is a massive rotating cutter head that presses into the rock and grinds it apart. And everything that gets drilled is automatically transported to the rear of the machine. This machine is not just a huge drill, it is an entire underground factory moving forward on rails. A single one of these colossal machines is as long as 14 London buses and weighs as much as 143 of them combined. Thanks to these incredible machines, humanity has become capable of underground construction. These machines have transformed many aspects of the world, including the economy, the environment, and even culture. Tunnels, like bridges, do not just connect places, they connect the people who live around them. Many of the world's most famous tunnels would not exist. Without these giant, boring machines, modern models can drill through tens of meters of rock per day, and Egypt already has extensive experience using them. A tunnel boring machine was used during the construction. Of the tunnels that pass under the Suez Canal, they chose a massive model with an internal diameter of about 11 meters, roughly the height of a 4-story building. Another similar machine was used in building the Cairo Metro, where 2 tunnels were constructed, each about 19 kilometers long and at depths ranging from 7.3 meters to 40 meters underground. In short, Egypt possesses the necessary experience, advanced machinery, and specialists who know how to operate these machines in conditions very similar to those expected in the Katara Depression. The good news is that after all this digging, the water will not even need pumps to fill the future basin. The Katara Depression lies about 60 meters below sea level, roughly the height of a 20-story building. But for now, this place is nothing more than a vast, scorching desert with no water and no inhabitants. If it were connected to the Mediterranean Sea through a canal or a system of tunnels, seawater could naturally flow into it due to the difference in elevation. However, a major obstacle looms ahead: the extreme heat, which would cause the water to evaporate at an alarming rate. Yet this challenge is actually the core of the entire idea. If engineers can balance the amount of water flowing into the depression with the rate at which it evaporates, they would create a constant and steady flow of water, and that flow can be harnessed to generate electricity. In other words, the desert would transform into a giant natural power plant. The only thing left is to reach precise and reliable calculations. The Nile River has almost exhausted its potential for hydroelectric power. Since the completion of the famous Aswan High Dam in 1968, all possible hydropower from the river has already been utilized. But Egypt continues to grow, and its demand for electricity is rising sharply. The country is in desperate need of a new major source of energy. The Katara Depression project could be exactly that source: cheap electricity and a massive boost to the entire economy. Frankly, it is a brilliant and simple idea, and the key lies in achieving the right balance. The rate of seawater flowing into the depression must match the rate at which it evaporates under the blazing sun. According to calculations, 10 years after the flooding begins, the water level would stabilize. The climate there is ideal in terms of dryness and minimal rainfall, making evaporation occur so rapidly that it becomes possible to maintain a nearly continuous inflow of seawater. According to old plans drawn up in the mid-20th century, first power station named Katara 1 was expected to produce up to 670 megawatts of power. In the second phase, output would increase by another 1,200 megawatts. And with the addition of a pump storage facility, total capacity could reach an extra 4,000 megawatts. Altogether, that is about 5,800 megawatts, roughly equivalent to 6 modern nuclear reactors. Another option is to build an artificial reservoir on the plateau above the depression to improve energy generation efficiency. Essentially, this project would be a massive water reservoir located about 60 meters below sea level, underground. Power stations equipped with a system of hydraulic gates would be constructed to control water flow. The station is designed to include 2 sets of turbines and equipment: standard turbine generators that produce electricity continuously, and reversible pump turbine generators that can operate in both directions. What is known as a pumped hydropower storage system, and it can be thought of as a giant battery. This system provides a dual benefit. It uses excess energy that would otherwise go to waste, and it helps cover shortages during peak hours. For the Katara project, the basic capacity is estimated at around 315 megawatts, but during peak hours, it could reach 2,500 megawatts, depending on how long the system is required to sustain high loads and how much energy is used to pump the water back up. Instead of sending all the generated electricity through long transmission lines to the Nile Delta, part of that power can be used to produce fresh water directly from the sea. The idea is very simple. Seawater from the Mediterranean flows into the lake and, due to pressure differences, passes through special filters and pipelines using reverse osmosis. Or the generated electricity can be used for desalination via electrolysis, where salts are separated from water using electric current. The result is the same: a new source of fresh water created in the heart of the desert. This is truly remarkable currently. Egypt operates 125 desalination plants with a total production capacity of more than 343 million gallons per day. And the future holds even more, as the government plans to increase production to 4 billion gallons per day by 2050. If all these elements are integrated into the Katara project, the result will not just be a power plant, but a real source of water for vast areas and even a source of salt. Yes, settlements would grow around the lake, and people would begin working there, including in activities like salt mining. Over time, the lake would turn into hypersaline water, essentially a giant salt basin, leading to increasing salt deposits at the bottom. But salt is not the only material that could be extracted. In 2024, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates already began exploring methods to extract lithium from saline deposits. So, if the Qattara Depression were actually flooded with water, it could become not only a source of energy and fresh water, but also a place from which a key resource for the new energy lithium could be extracted. And what about the broader agenda? If everything goes according to plan, the lake could eventually change the entire regional climate, making it cooler and more humid. By mid-century, the Qattara Depression could transform from a scorching, waterless desert into a fertile region capable of supporting tens of millions of people. The project would provide jobs for millions of young Egyptians, which is critical given the high unemployment rate. Economists and environmental scientists have studied the feasibility of the project, and according to their calculations, it should be both profitable and environmentally sustainable. As water flows into the depression, it will evaporate, increasing humidity and potentially rainfall in the area. The lake would remain large enough to support a massive fish farm and provide new food resources. While the soil would be protected from wind erosion, developing the Qattara Depression could boost exports and imports, revive tourism, and increase economic activity in the region. In short, it would improve everything without making anything worse. Using the water, electricity could be generated, land could be irrigated, and new settlements could be built around it: agricultural, industrial, urban, and touristic. All of this is part of a major development plan stretching from south of Al Alamein to south of Salem. The plan envisions that around 34 million people could live in this area over the next 40 years. Today, Egypt relies heavily on food imports and balances. This by developing industries and exporting goods to pay for the food it purchases. Local resources such as cotton, wheat, sugarcane, and fruit have already driven growth in the processing sector. Additionally, iron and manganese ores, oil, phosphate, and gold have provided energy and raw materials for heavy industries. If the Qattara project becomes a reality, it could be seen as a continuation of the great achievement that began with the construction of the Aswan High Dam. Currently, Egypt's hydroelectric power plants generate only about 7% of the country's electricity, with another 5% coming from wind and solar energy. This is certainly an improvement over the meager 1% in 2015. But it is still below the global average of roughly 13%. Egypt is striving to catch up, and by 2030, the country plans to generate 42% of its electricity from clean sources such as solar and wind. Today, the backbone of hydroelectric power in Egypt consists of 4 main plants: the old Aswan Dam, the Esna Dam, the High Dam in Aswan, and the Nag Hammadi Dam. In 2016, a new plant joined them. Located at the Asut Dam, the High Dam still provides nearly all of Egypt's hydroelectric power, with a theoretical capacity of approximately 2.1 GW. But when the Nile's water levels drop, the plant cannot operate at full capacity. For this reason, Egypt urgently needs new sources to support and complement its aging system. While the Qattara Depression project remains stuck at the stage of discussion and calculations, other projects are already in progress, helping the country, if not fully advancing confidently, toward green energy. Then, at least moving in the right direction. One of the favored projects is the East Oanat project. More than 95% of Egypt's land is desert. All water resources are essentially concentrated along a narrow strip of the Nile, while the rest is a vast sea of sand with almost no arable land. Yet the population continues to grow, and people still need food. In recent years, Egypt has learned how to create water in the desert. In a photograph taken by an astronaut from the International Space Station, one can see what appears to be a pattern of enormous green circles. These are the agricultural fields of East Oanat in southwest Egypt. Imagine, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, hundreds of miles from the nearest city, surrounded by sand and rocks, there are perfectly green circles. The secret lies underground. Beneath the desert lies the massive Nubian sandstone aquifer, an ancient rock layer that has stored fresh water for millions of years. This is what keeps these projects alive. For people living far from the Nile, it is the only source of water. There is virtually no rainfall here, with an annual average essentially at 0. As a result, the entire system relies on precise and efficient irrigation. The circular shape is no accident. It is all about center pivot irrigation. In the center of each circle is a well, from which water is pumped through long pipes that rotate around it like the hands of a clock. This is how water is distributed evenly across the field. Each of these circles spans approximately 2,600 feet in diameter. The soil is not perfect, but the deep water is almost free of salt, making it ideal for growing almost anything. The fields are primarily planted with potatoes. The dark green circles are wheat. The light brown circles are herbs, such as chamomile. And the reddish circles are plots that have been deliberately burned to clear the soil for new crops. Everything grown here is transported via desert roads to the Dakhla Oasis and Abu Simbel, or exported through the nearest airport. The East Oanat project actually began a long time ago, in 1991, as a desperate attempt to transform part of the desert into arable land. Today, it is managed by the National Company for Land Reclamation and Agriculture, affiliated with the Egyptian Armed Forces. In 2021, the project was expanded from its original 172 square miles to an additional 2,180 square miles. Ultimately, the Qattara Depression remains a tremendous engineering and economic challenge, yet it carries the promise of transforming a barren desert into a permanent source of clean energy and a habitat for life. It is a battle between difficult calculations and grand dreams, with hopes pinned on this massive project to open the door to a brighter future providing energy, water, and vital resources, and realizing the dream of housing millions of people in the heart of the desert. It could reduce dependence on external energy and extend the legacy of the Aswan High Dam, but this time by creating a new sea in the heart of the desert. Driven by Egypt's determination to achieve self-sufficiency and reclaim desert land, as was done in East Oanat. If you had to choose, do you think Egypt's efforts should focus on grand projects that could change geography, like the Qattara Sea project, or on expanding existing proven projects like East Oanat to secure food supplies? Share your opinion in the comments. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.